Hello, this is the Indianness podcast, stories of success from leaders and change makers of Indian origin. Why have Indians achieved success across so many disciplines around the globe? I have no idea, but let's find out together. Every story is unique, and I'm very excited to have Nitin Sahney with us today. He's the CEO and founder of PharmaCord. His company, PharmaCord, is on a torrid pace of growth, and this is his fourth pharma company that he's been involved with. But I invited him on the show as he has a unique window into patient experience. And given the amount of money that the United States spends on healthcare, and in return, the quality of patient care that we receive, I wanted to also discuss with him what can be done to improve that because he has, as I said, a unique perspective to that. Welcome, Nitin. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Nitin, you obviously have been in the pharma business, but more importantly, can you just walk us through your journey up until now? Tell us a little bit about where were you born, and a little bit about your upbringing, how was it, etc.
Sure. And thanks for inviting me, Sanjay. And one of the reasons for doing this is being of Indian origin. So it's important for me. I usually don't get on camera too much to draw any attention to myself. But I'm from Dehradun in India and went to a boarding school at the age of 5 and left a boarding school at the age of 18. So really, my experiences in my young age were more in being a well-rounded person than frankly being focused on academics. So after that, I left and worked in Delhi, studied in Punjab University, came to the US in late 80s. And I'm not working like within the pharma company. We work in the pharmaceutical industry and biotech, which means we're in the healthcare space of helping patients, etc. But we can explain that later. And, I've had the fortune of working with very exciting companies that have been both publicly traded and private, and frankly have done nothing unique except, doing what is supposed to be done in healthcare, and fortunate enough to be able to do this a couple of times.
No, that's very fascinating. Nitin, as you know, Dehradun is known for Dune School and Vellums and things of that nature. Just what was and the reason we do this a little bit is, Nitin, is to really understand what makes change makers like you successful, because there is this thing, Indians or people of Indian origin have been so successful. What was the reason that you went to boarding school so early? Any specific reason?
If you ask my mother, she felt that being in a joint family would have spoiled me. So I think she would tell you the right age would have been 11, but my brother went. But I honestly contribute a lot of my learnings to an early age of fending for yourself. Like, what you learn really is how to play with others, how to work in teams. You don't realize it when you're young, or when, you're like in your teens. But I think specifically Wellams and Dune School specifically, because, that's later in your teens. I was never top of the class, for example, academically, but was involved in several activities. And fortunately for us in those days, they were focused more on service, how to work in a team, how to be able to, not have any pressures of being top of your class. And being in a disciplined system where things work. For example, no one really checked us after the classes. We were supposed to solve our own issues by ourselves between the system of monitors and prefects. I think those things really count later in life. And I felt I was very fortified, frankly, to be more in the US in this system than India itself, because when you leave a very comfortable environment of a doom school, you're not that prepared for the Indian way of doing things. But when you come here, you realize the kind of education you got, not only that, the kindness, good manners, how to communicate, not having the fear to talk to anyone. those were the things I think, you find out later on how lucky we were to be able to get that education.
So the boarding school was a very formative thing for you because at least here, because of the public school system in the US and others, there are very few people who go to the boarding school, but you thought that
Yeah.
really played a very significant role, Nitin, in being able to fend for yourself, being independent, work in teams, figure out
Yeah,
ways around things.
absolutely.
And
And also how to handle affluence,
Mhm,
and you're surrounded by people from different backgrounds. Most of them happen to be affluent,
mhm,
but I think we were taught not to let that be the main thing. We didn't know till we were 16, for example, who's who.
mhm.
And so I think led a very innocent life where you were not driven by materialism, but you really were driven as an equal system and participant. That's important.
Oh, that's fantastic. Your brother also went to a boarding school, Nitin?
Yes, my younger brother went to Doon, and I have a lot of cousins, a lot of family that went to Doon.
Okay.
Yes.
My sister went to Wellams, but that's a whole different story. But
She will
no,
know
but
exactly. It's the same
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, that's very interesting. Nitin, so you came here after you went to Punjab University. You came to the
Mhm.
US. Why? What was the reason for coming to the US?
I worked in India for 3 years at
Hmm.
Ballarpur Industries, which was part of the Thapar Group. Frankly, I
Hmm.
learned a lot there. In those days, it was a blue chip company.
Hmm.
And the management training program that I was part of really, really educated me in ways that I had never imagined.
Hmm.
But I also knew in India that you needed an MBA in those days. It was emerging to come back and really have a career in management. When I came here, I had no intentions of actually staying in the US.
Hmm.
And, everyone will tell you the same story.
Hmm.
But in those days, India had not fully developed. This is 1987, 88,
Hmm.
and the economy had not opened up. So by the time I graduated, the opportunities in India were not what they were in even late 90s. And the opportunities here were there
Hmm.
in front of me. But for
Hmm.
next 10 years, I always thought I'll go back because my
Hmm.
heart has always been in India and Dehradun. You never really,
Hmm.
I didn't even pretend. Others pretend that they become, you can be an American, but you don't ever lose,
Hmm.
you know, the values and your Indianness, so to speak. So
Hmm.
it took me many years to really reconcile to the fact that this is how it's going to be. And the US has been really good. It's been a perfect system for people like us to come here and be entrepreneurial and do good things. It's a clean system. Actually, it's very well built, if you ask me. And by
Hmm.
the way, I couldn't get into really good schools in India. Like, I'm not one of those who could have got into IIT if my life depended on it. So we came here more that it was easier to come here and study than actually be in the Indian competitive environment, to be honest.
I can relate to that. Nitin, so you came here, and then
Mhm.
how did you get into the pharma side of the business? Because your whole career has been in the pharma world.
It was by default. Again, like, in the US, anytime someone meets an Indian, they think you're a doctor. And I joke with them, we were never that bright to be a doctor. But, you have these business instincts. So I did my MBA and
Mhm,
worked in New York very briefly in finance, got my green card. Because in those days, you could get that.
mhm,
And came to Columbus, Ohio by default for many other reasons. When I reached Columbus, I had no job. And I was placed by a temp agency into a healthcare company called Caremark. And so it wasn't really like I was an expert in healthcare. And that was actually a very large, good, well run company.
mhm,
And I was in my 20s and I learned a lot there. And then I went to Cardinal Health, which was even a bigger healthcare company. But I was more in healthcare from a business point of view on
mhm,
how to make sure that these biotech products that were really emerging and game
mhm,
changing for different disease states, these all chronic disease states, how to build a business around it. So I was one of the first few people who ventured into that space by accident, not because I was trained to do it.
mhm,
But I think it comes down to people like us. When we see an opportunity, we pour our hearts and souls into it and in a disciplined way. And we enjoy doing what we do. And
mhm,
that led to a corporate life of being very fortunate, I would say, of having increasing responsibilities of running a P&L, I was a general manager at age 29 of a Fortune 500 company.
Wow.
And that led me to start my own company again in healthcare. So it wasn't because, frankly, I'm an expert, but I would say I'm a business person who knows how to build businesses in healthcare.
So you are a business person who knows how to build healthcare, because we are always trying to figure out the drivers. Were your parents, were your dad an entrepreneur by any chance?
Most of us came from a business family. But
Okay,
one of the reasons I left India was to escape that system of going and working in a family
family.
business. So my mother has been a very big part of it. She raised us more as a single parent. And even though we went to good schools, the values that were driven were very much intact. Like always give more than you take.
Mhm,
You don't need someone to watch over you. You just do the right thing.
mhm.
That came from my mother, I would say. And even today, if I was to make a decision, many ways I always think, what would she think? And, with all these companies I've been involved with, we've never talked about money. Like my mother's never asked me what my salary is or what I did, has never
Mhm,
asked me how much did you get for selling a company. So you
mhm,
were really well raised in some
mhm,
ways not to chase the greed of money, but to
mhm.
really create value and participate in the value creation. Very different. So that came from my mother. I would give her the credit for that.
Wow. So when you started your first company, there was no fear, hey, I've never done this before, it's something completely new, I could fall on my face, or something like
Now,
that.
that has to do a little bit with our background, but mostly, everyone's different. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the pressure of a typical Dune School guy who went to Harvard and
Mm-hmm.
had to go to McKinsey, and people always thought there's a path. People
Mm-hmm.
like us who were middle of the class, if not bottom of the class in Dune, really had no fear. I mean, it's not just me, and we worked with no pressure. I really think that was a very big contributing factor. Unlike,
Mm-hmm.
people who went into engineering schools had to go to MIT or someone had to go to medical school.
Mm-hmm.
My parents never asked me what my grades were in Dune. you know.
Wow.
So I think those were the few things I look back when you have no fear and you feel this is a fair system in the US. I honestly, maybe I wasn't bright enough to think what would happen if something fails. It was just one thing led to another, and one was grateful for every opportunity you got.
So in a way you're saying that, because, again, paraphrasing you, you didn't, going to one of these elite schools, whether it's MIT, Stanford, or IIT, in a way, it freed you from, taking maybe more risks, because what the heck could have happened?
Yes. And I admire those schools. Listen, don't get me wrong. If I could have got into
Sure.
those schools, I would have loved to, but I think there
Wow.
was no pressure.
Hmm.
And once I left India and I knew I left a very comfortable, affluent family life, I somehow was trained more than I thought to fend for myself and
Hmm.
not to make any excuses, not to blame anyone if and things always they don't go right, as you know. Whether
Hmm.
you start a company or in a corporate environment, it comes down to people skills, how you navigate things.
Hmm.
Frankly, I'm lucky enough to say it was very natural to have good conversations like you're having with me. You
Hmm.
know, when you're curious about other people, when you're well read, you can have good conversations. And those things we didn't realize how much they really mattered because whether it's India or US, once you reach the executive suite, you better be interesting. You better be
Hmm.
able to hold a conversation. Everyone
Yeah.
knows you have to produce financially. So those kind of things came naturally, and hence there was no fear. You always felt if this thing doesn't work, you can always have a job, and you kept yourself together in terms of low ego, not wanting materialistic things. Those were never the things that motivated me personally. So I had no pressure. And I
Wow.
think those were the reasons.
So no pressure, no ego. Those were some of the things that were really, but also the ability to communicate. Maybe that was a Dune School thing, or just came naturally to you, able
It was
to.
both.
Mhm.
Indians are good communicators, at least the ones who are generalists.
Okay.
I just feel, whether it's India or here, when you go into a profession too early, whether you're a doctor or an engineer or a data scientist,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always a big believer, even though I did economics in my undergrad, but it was more of a liberal arts education in Doon,
Mm-hmm.
where you would find me sitting in a library reading a book more than playing cricket, even though I loved cricket. I
Mm.
think those things about enjoying things that are very simple in life and having a broad based thinking, that carries on, you know. So I wouldn't say it's just Doon School. Of course, that allowed me, but you have to be curious about life and how, even as a young person in our family conversations, we were very well um, read. You know, you knew what was happening in the world those days.
Mm-hmm.
You were healthy debates with friends, having different opinions. Those were all welcome. So I grew up that way, and I think that really helped.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Because liberal arts is not, in a way, it's a dying thing because, as you said, in Indians, we call it the two profession rule, doctors or engineers. So you had a much broader experience. Nitin, from that job to where you came, there were many steps along the way. Can you just walk us through that
Sure.
because you've been with some big companies, big positions. You're now on the board of several publicly traded companies. So just walk us through a little bit about that journey because it's very fascinating.
I will mention a few details
Mhm.
because those you can't put, I don't make my own LinkedIn, but
Yeah.
it's a good question because this is meant to be helping others and motivating others.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a large company, when I joined Cardinal Health, it was a $1 billion market cap company.
Mm-hmm.
When I left in 8 years, it was 60 billion, not because of me. It grew
Wow.
through acquisitions.
Wow.
And the business I'd built for them was a $400 million business, which was, by the way, a very big one in $1 billion company.
Mm-hmm.
So at age 36, I realized that I was the youngest executive. I would have had to wait 10 more years to go and run anything bigger within a company. And it was kind of getting boring,
Mm.
Being a corporate executive is fascinating in terms of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided that I wanted to build my own business if I could raise capital.
Mm-hmm.
And I resigned. In those days I could have had, if I'd stayed, I could have had X amount of options vested. I never thought about it.
Mm.
And I found an investor in Louisville, Kentucky, through a mutual friend
Mm.
who was basically only an investor, but he was in commercial real estate.
Okay.
And he was not an Indian. And we
Uh-huh.
met. And again, you talk about people skills or communications. We hit off really well. And
Mm.
he asked me, like, what do you think you'll need? So I gave him the amount that would take to start a company. And we shook hands. And he said, how much do you want out of this company that you want to start? And I gave him an amount. We'd had a handshake deal. I left a very comfortable job with a 9-month-old kid at that time and moved to
Unbelievable.
Louisville, Kentucky. And really, I mean, you're talking about from scratch. Had the investment, put a team together. That company, by the way, you've read, I don't want to mention, financial numbers because it kind of dilutes the conversation, but it was successful financially, and I was still 42 years old by the time we sold it.
Wow.
So we sold it
Wow.
to a publicly traded company. Then I became part of the publicly traded company. One thing led to the other, and I ended up running that company. And then we sold that publicly traded company to CVS. So things happen not because you had a plan to do this or make, I know everyone says it, but when you focus on a valuation only and you focus on making money, you lose the plot. So my attitude has always been, hey, life is already good. And I remember someone asked me, like, what if it doesn't work when I went to Louisville? And I said, you know what? The job I left, I have the confidence I can get a job like that. And that was good enough. And so, again, no pressure, raised money, but not debt, and had never really gone independently and run a company. So, you learn a lot. I learned so much by starting a company, selling the company. It's hard enough to start a company, run a company, but it's really hard to sell a company. It's a whole different, it's
Mm-hmm.
a whole different level. And
Wow.
Omnicare, when I went in, it was a very, it was a Fortune 500 company that I realized the best way for shareholders is to sell the company. It was not my company. My
Mm-hmm.
job was to increase the stock price. So again, knowing what the goals are is very important.
Mm-hmm.
The goal was not to make it an entrepreneurial company. It was, and the returns were phenomenal. In 4, 5, 6 years, we sold it for a very good valuation. The shareholders were happy. Then, when we sold that company, I realized I did not want to work for a large company again and give another 5, 7 years. So then we started a company called PharmaCord, but with certain conditions. No outside capital. We'll use our
Mm-hmm.
own capital, which allows us to put the right team in place to build our technology platform in the same space, by the way. It's not like we've innovated anything. We just feel we are more efficient. We do things better. And that was enough of a delta to create value. And now, in 6.5 years, this company from scratch, again, starting in one room, is 1,200 people. It is multiples of EBITDA. I won't mention how much,
Mm-hmm.
but it is the fastest growing healthcare company according to private equity in healthcare that is independent in the US. So again, you know what it was? It was putting the right system in place, the right executives, not working as a founder owner mentality, but running it like a publicly traded company where people feel it's fair, and having enough equity for others where they feel, you're part of the team. You're not treated as a second class executive. Having the ability to share, to
Mm-hmm.
include people, and to build 3 levels below comes by, putting the right system in place. And it's the learnings from the first 2 or 3 that went into PharmaCord, and here we are in 6.5 years as, I would say, well-built company that is not even halfway through the journey of where we should be. And
Wow.
so that's kind of the story,
Yeah.
that we've
Wow.
had here.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But Nitin, along the way, there must have been challenges too, right? It can't have been just, I mean,
Of course.
it's a fantastic journey. So, how did you deal with those challenges? Because, people listening to you, obviously, it's a very inspirational thing, but they also they deal with challenges. So, how do you deal with challenges? Does your, you know, uh, you
It's
know,
a very transparent system. You have to work with the team. Again, if people who are going to be running companies or on the executive ranks, what I would tell them is don't waste your 30s and 40s with trying to build a lifestyle.
hmm,
You have to build value wherever you go by surrounding yourselves with good people, really leading a simple personal life so that you don't have pressures at home, that you have to live in a certain house. Those things happen naturally if they have to happen. So
hmm,
removing the pressure from yourself, making sure that you're not dictated by how others think about you, the power of indifference, as they say,
hmm,
and working with people who are with those same value system. When you have that, then when the challenges come, for example, getting business, no matter how
hmm,
many times you do it and how well people know you, when you get your first contract, people
hmm.
don't, they're taking a risk by giving it to a startup company.
Yep.
How to go without pressure and talk to those people and not view it as, hey, I've had this track record and these successes, you should just come to us. You have to constantly show to your clients what is the value that you can. And they're willing to bet with you once they know you well enough that you're going to do everything not to fail them. For example, I still tell our clients, by the way, we have a world-class team out here now of executives that we have worked with in various combinations from last 4 companies. They could have gone anywhere.
Hmm.
So attracting people that are not fascinated about an outcome financially, but they're fascinated by outcome reputationally. Very important, very, very key difference. So if you're built that way, you can face the challenges of getting business, challenges of making sure that the people challenges that come along, operational challenges every day. But you see, that's your job. I mean, part of running a business is that 9 out of 10 times you're going to be solving puzzles and problems, you know, but if you're comfortable doing it, then that DNA is such that you know that the journey in the end is going to be fine. But if you put too much pressure where every time you're thinking, my gosh, I'm going to fail, or if I don't get this contract, what's going to happen? And again, I know it's not being idealistic, but at least for me and the people that I've surrounded myself, it's worked. It's worked for 30 years, you know. And I don't want to talk about others, but I find there's so much pressure on people when they do well. They have to live a certain way. They're judged in society by, what their titles are. I find so many of my Indian friends more fascinated about the span of control they're managing in a large company. And I tell them, man, your 40s and 50s, take some risk. You know, I'm not
Yeah.
saying go start a company, but go to a startup, go to a company that is small, and you'll find out, you just can't create value in mature companies. So you have to have a certain mindset. And you can then deal with the challenges. Challenges every day. I'm sitting here, the challenges as we speak of 1,200 people. We're adding another 500 by end of the year. You have to hire them, train them, put management over them. So business will come. Are you ready for business? People always think it's a demand issue. It really isn't. It's an execution issue. So every day, how do you constantly keep improving, constantly look for problems in your business proactively? If you have that mindset, you'll manage the challenges. If you're not really in touch every day and all you want to do is sit in a corporate room because you think you've made it, you will get surprised in a bad way. And I think those are some of the lessons I would like to share that have worked for us.
Well, those are excellent points. If you're in your 30s and 40s, take risks, but lead a simple lifestyle. Surround yourself with some phenomenal people, and don't hide yourself in a corporate room. Be amongst the people.
Don't get fascinated by titles.
Don't get
Don't value
fascinated.
yourself by, what your Indian friends on a weekend think how you're doing. Don't get into the competitive side of, oh my gosh, this guy's bought this. Those are distasteful things. And when I say simple life, you can live any way you want to, but have your simple thinking. Don't trade away so much of your intellect by, measuring yourself by how you live and how you travel and all that. That's what I mean by simplicity.
That's an excellent point. A lot of our guests, Nitin, talk about the role of mentors
Mm-hmm.
in their career. Now, obviously, you seem like you've mentored hundreds and hundreds of people, but have there been mentors along your journey too, Nitin?
I hope you don't take it as an arrogant thing, but I was never lucky enough to have a mentor.
Oh my God.
Because think about this, when I went to Cardinal Health, it was a holding company. I mean, they just
Mm-hmm.
said, here's your P&L, produce.
Mm.
Very different. There was no time for anyone. That was the way it was in those days. Then when we started our own company,
Mm.
I was the person in charge. There was really, I would say, the investor who's a good friend of mine, who still is an investor in this company, who's 81 years old, my best friend, his
Mm-hmm.
name is Jim.
Mm-hmm.
I would say closely, he could be a mentor in the sense I asked for his advice all the time, but no one sat down and said, here's how you do it. Here's what you have to avoid. I wish I had that. I think I would have been a better person. So I really do believe
Not even the
having a
board,
mentor.
not even the board members or anybody, Nitin?
So here's the thing.
Mhm.
RX Crossroads, the company I started, never had a board because we owned it. When we
Oh,
went to Omnicare, it had a board and you had to report. There was a governance structure. No problem doing it. But the board does not mentor you. They have the governance structure.
wow.
Then when we started PharmaCord, we owned it. There's no board of PharmaCord. I'm just giving you an idea. So
Wow.
it's hard to believe. Like, for example, this company has zero debt. So even the banks don't even call you. We don't even have a
Wow.
line of credit. So we have kept it so pure that somehow we lost the plot in terms of, hey, we should be mentored. Of
That's
course, there's
true.
room for mentoring, and there's room for learning.
That's true. That is true. Do you think that would have helped you quite a bit if you had some mentors along the way?
It depends. Mentors have to be so unselfish.
Mm-hmm.
Mentoring, and that's what I do with people, is it's not just trying to find a job for someone or place them. It is truly taking the time to understand them, their families, being really invested both emotionally and personally. Then only can you really help someone navigate. So, for example, I have most of the people that I mentor have never worked with me. So it has to be pure. You can't mentor someone so that you can use them.
Okay.
So when you take that approach, it has to be a very pure relationship. So I'm fortunate enough, if you ask me, that I would say there are 20, 30 executives and maybe 30, 40 young people in this company. But I take the time when I sit with the young people here in PharmaCord, I tell them not a single sentence will be about PharmaCord, as an example. It's about you and me. I want to make sure that you're fortified so you can leave PharmaCord. Someday you want to leave PharmaCord to do better somewhere. So use PharmaCord. Now, if you took the approach as a mentor, CEO, you won't be saying that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very pure, it's a humbling experience. You have such responsibility to keep it pure. So I know what it is to mentor. I wish I had the same thing in my younger days. I don't know. I'm sure it would have helped in many ways.
Yeah, I hear your point. I wanted to ask you, and you mentioned that you really are not in pharma, but you do have a perspective on patient care. And this is really,
Absolutely.
we spend, I don't know, 15% of our GDP or something like that on
Mm-hmm.
healthcare. I mean, you know that.
17%, yeah.
17%. So, but, the quality of patient care maybe is not in line with what I would
Mm-hmm.
say we spend. What is the reason, if you were to look? I mean, you have spent your entire career from a business and
Sure.
others. If you were to just give a very brief view, because I have a few other questions, and I know you have a
So
tight
you're
deadline.
absolutely right. There's a lot of wastage. So if
Mhm,
you look at the 4 Ps, right?
mhm,
Pharmaceuticals,
mhm,
providers, which is
mhm,
like, for example, physician offices.
mhm,
You look at payers, insurance companies, and
mhm,
patients.
mhm,
Even today in the United States, the data does not go across all four, as an example.
mhm,
All four of them work as separate healthcare sectors.
mhm,
When you look at it's unfair to compare it to Europe, for example, where the population is 11 million, for example, in Sweden,
mhm,
or 4.5 million in Denmark.
mhm,
So 350 million people that are part of, with Obamacare. I would say we have enough money in the system, for example, to have free healthcare for everyone, to have discounted pricing on, I think your question about biotech pharmaceutical products. But we are not efficient. And we are not efficient because, in some ways, we like government not interfering as capitalists. But on the other hand, the largest payer in the US is Medicare. So the
mhm,
government actually is the biggest reimbursement for most of the people. They've never put a structure in place how to negotiate the right kind of service, etc., for patients, because that would entail another huge department of magnitude to be able to do that. So I think there are many reasons we don't have the right tort laws. Today you have physicians spending most of their money trying to have insurance, for example,
mhm.
so that they don't get sued.
So,
You got hospitals that are very inefficient because they have to, in some cases, take 30%, 40% of the patients can't pay. So then
mhm,
they start charging those of us with insurance.
mhm,
You had asked a question, I think, earlier also. Why are biotech pharmaceutical products 10 times more expensive than Europe or India? The reason is the innovation takes place here. A
mhm,
typical biotech product costs billions of dollars of research and manufacturing.
mhm.
But when you go to Europe or you go to Canada or you go to India, it's a little bit different. They don't get the same pricing from there because the governments have caps on it.
Mhm.
So United States is the only market where they can recover the investment.
Yeah.
And that's why the prices are high.
So we are the R&D for the world, basically, is
We
what
are the
you're saying.
R&D for the world. We are the markets for the world.
World.
Take
Mhm.
top 10 biotech companies, 7 of them are not even US headquartered, but they're 60% of the sales or 70% are in the United States.
That's
So
true.
that's one of the reasons. Obviously, it's a longer discussion to
Yeah.
go into this part of it.
That's a longer discussion. Nitin, you've done so much. I mean, listening to you, I mean, you probably have done what more people do in maybe 2 or 3 lifetimes. But where do you see your journey going from here? I mean, it seems like you still have, I see a lot more, but I would love to hear where do you see your journey?
I'm thinking through it, Sanjay. I'm contemplating that as we speak.
Okay.
My philosophy in life is one should always plan your exit before others plan for you. Now, fortunately, I've been in those situations where legally I'm the only one who can plan my exit. But I see such talent. For example, I think if I was to do this for several more years, I'll get a new CEO. Not because we need one, but I feel you need the next generation person who can completely dedicate himself or herself
Mm-hmm.
to take this company to another level. There's no one to tell me, there's no board, there's not really, not even shareholders from outside, except for one friend that I have that is a minority shareholder. So you have to then take the approach of responsibility.
Right.
This could be 5,000 jobs in 3 years. How to put a structure? So I'm thinking through those things.
Okay.
But frankly, I have no idea what I would do if I was not operating. So
Oh,
I've
you'll be
started
doing
thinking
something very,
about,
you'll be doing something very interesting. I'm
oh,
100%
absolutely.
sure.
Listen, I'm a boring person. I play not, I mean, I don't even know how to play golf. I live on a golf course,
Yeah.
right? So I have a simple
You're not a
life.
golfing kind person, believe me,
No,
Nitin.
I want to be interacting, making a difference in people's lives.
People's
How I
lives.
do it, I haven't figured that out beyond business today.
Okay.
Hopefully
Yeah,
that's the next
hopefully
one.
soon.
Yeah.
Nitin, if you were to have a conversation with Nitin, who is 20 years old, what would you be saying to him? Just go back to that time.
What I would say is that what you have learned at 20, like for example, when I came to the US, the first 7, 8 years were pretty ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is I always believed you can go to any institution, and I still do. You don't have to go to the top tier institutions. I wish in those days I'd listened to others. Like I could have gone to Carnegie Mellon, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would have learned a lot more. Listen, my education, Punjab University in Doon fortified me. But frankly, going to a good graduate school, for example, and aiming for it and studying a little bit towards that, I think would have made me even more well-rounded in the US system. So I had to go through a little bit more longer journey, even though I did things in my 20s. I think that would have helped. I think when I look back at 20, I was much more idealistic. You're 20, you're still a baby. You're still maturing. And
Yeah.
I think in hindsight, I should have not left India, if you ask me. I still have the love for
Really?
India. Sometimes I
Wow.
wonder if I'd been there in the late 90s and 2000. I'm not even talking about money. I think India is a much more difficult place to do business in some ways. But
Mm-hmm.
if you ask me, it's not a regret, but a 20-year-old would have not left India. And we're talking now more hypothetically, more
Yeah.
as a thing.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what
Well,
I would have said.
that's a surprise. So, do a master's in Carnegie potentially and not leave India. That's very interesting.
And
Uh,
listen, I love the US. Don't get me wrong. It's a perfect
yeah,
system.
I know.
I'm totally assimilated.
I know.
I love the freedom here. But I'm
Mhm.
just telling you, I
Yeah.
wish I had done more in India in some ways. I still have that feeling, not as a charity. India doesn't need people like us. But, if we could do it here, maybe, there's an opportunity to work in some ways in healthcare, for example. I don't know. For that, you need a lot
That
of different.
chapter is not over yet,
I
Nitin.
hope
So,
so. I hope
oh,
it's
it is
still
not.
there. I don't know.
Yeah, it is still there. But now, so Nitin, we do have a rapid or a lightning round of questions, and since we are coming to the end,
Yeah.
your definition of Indianness. Now, you have kind of defined it in this conversation, but
Yeah.
I want to hear it from you because we ask that to everybody.
To me, it is your roots. It's a simple
Mhm.
question.
It's
We are
your root.
transplants out here. Keep your
Mhm.
roots. That's Indianness.
Wow. Okay. Nitin, a person either of Indian origin or person in India that living, not your family, that you admire. We ask that to everybody too.
There's so many of them. I would
Give us
still
a.
say right now,
Mhm.
you want a brand name or you want just anyone?
No, I just say any your choice, Nitin. Just not your
I,
family.
I would say my ex-headmaster in Doon School that wrote my first letter for my first job in India, who's no more.
What was his name, Nitin, if you don't mind me
His name
asking?
was Gulab Ramchandani.
Gulab Ramchan. Well, that's a great,
Yeah.
great, great suggestion. Great suggestion. Now, since you brought up the point of cricket, I'm going to just sneak in one last one. Your favorite cricketer,
Sunil Gavaskar,
Sunny.
old-fashioned way.
Yeah,
Funny.
Sunny, great cricketer,
I have
great.
quite a few, but you asked me for one, so I would name one.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I know we are running up against time, but I've kept it 2 minutes before. This has really been and very, very enlightening and very, very helpful. And thanks for being so candid and so open. And I'm hoping a lot of our listeners will learn a lot from you. And hopefully they'll reach out to you in some cases. But real pleasure. Thanks, Nitin, for being on the
Thanks for the
podcast.
opportunity, Sanjay. Really enjoyed talking to you.
No, thank you.